Namo Jode Ne Tejen Shinpo Drajambo Yangdobo Zobe San Revo No Shoso Denpo Devo Shipo Juden Chenpo Jubo De Kalo Jiwo Lana Menpo Lado Minan Denpo Sanje Jode De Bejawo Joja Dobo La Shanze 求多教作些我公子公年做这当子，少见的那公婆的婆，那年就点的那出去送的这个我就那小子，那到公安处都做上我一些讲做事就能不。这帮酒店送到了给我，公布就你叫了样子，前脚电话这边大约就三多找我叫了样子，对着见着随我送往街，两面就见叫了样子，公布途径确定不，东西前边的不。色那一点叫做人的人写了上子，他别的唱着我就给人送的主，许多的当求就不先就出了上子，这年这月老样的老婆到了手段，先给当婆一点点给这老样上子。六八见阳门下心，给我别说说吧，让给三年永说的，的年上见的吧，干嘛着的嘛面当，就嘛是完就吧，没让路到真道不，都先就能得到。三郎的月当节日八夜，各方当年全军着点。噶当那当切别拉住，随便早点着我哟。
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvatiputra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure, they neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomenon. There is no quality of sight and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on, up to no old age and death, and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell on the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, noble Avalokiteshvara, that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
小觉作我的老所我的。杜鹃前波的仙，杜鹃将，竹子的萝卜当那萝卜，边角竹边波当阿的香，鸟来喜乐吉拉所望的，上波同面一年当着的，秋天的月的当着边边，在那个三六年四零八。了解是边界那所望的，了有有名书记路中道，那我这不这边可就见，三界公众宝宝要塞所，萨摩大愿界那所望的，协助当边中阿的上，高端的边面部中的见。天就那就过去送了送，高到那么那那所我的，看见心的自己做个梦，我到这边我手接着见，东啊这边到不开着见，要是就不见了所我的，叫做个的那么多的长。阿拉贡的新年最重的，说当天梦我住存在边，这些老么能拉所望的，让家送着给拉大爷面，给咱他把这边就我就，这边这边他看这把眼，现在新年那拉所望的。叫我更多样的那么大，人民世界别了能学进，撒到能就一定说做的，多久强给个源头也就三年就能做的就能让。想就不多，当年叫做见，大约姐姐这边所难见，到了平时上见诸不休，上见就所见就难难，想就不多，当年叫做。大约姐姐这边所难见，到了平时上见诸不休，上见。就当作业就那那，想就不多，当年就作业，大约就天天别做那些，到了平时上学就不说。哎呀，哎呀，给你们配名那个做，哥们你。他给多久小姐这种人心就门徒对着梦讲，世界能帮大不疾病，小姐这不的那上子路，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙。哦，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙明天说，明天。哦，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙明天说，明天明天忙。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天忙。哦，明天哦，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天忙，明天明天忙，明天。哦，明天明天忙，明天。 Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma. Om mene mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Om mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. No mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene. Om mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Om mene mene ma mene lo mene mene ma mene lo mene mene. Genyo pesa mene mene ma mene lo mene.
문제가 되긴 해요, 그럼.
Ale.
문제 송화 사본 나주 세제 사득만도 선.
아메. 야야 나다.
이메일 되게 재산 습습사제 가제비나. 뭐 사부단도 제를 사부단 양투주 되는데 코스.
나다. 오메네 오메나에 소와지. 아이. 야. 당가서 지대 추보된 농로라 당장 전자로 진행돼. 근데 제대로 만에 돼. 지금은 제거에 진행이나 세지 좋아요. 맞아. 근데 맞아 코아생에 대 또그 당선이 초대요. 아니 단단데 가서 다 도저 도산 신나다 땅 이게 차리지만도 근데 그 사례가 그 사말에 세대로 신주 제가 뺏게 참을 가서 샘플 조합면 되겠지 그때는 우주제 괜찮을지도
So we should always ask ourselves a question that should we really take our time to discuss this teachings of the Dharma? Because we have a different, we as a sentient beings in the samsaric or samsaric beings who has a different desire, different objective. But when it comes to the discussions on Dharma or receiving the teachings of the Dharma, which takes you to a different direction and have a different, enables you to have a different objective or the aspirations and so on. So now the important point here is now to ask ourselves: is it worthwhile to take our time and engaging in such a discussions where we're actually taking a completely different directions? Because if we look at ourselves, that's the very purpose of discussions on Dharma is to change our mind, transform our minds. If the mind has not slightly changed, and if the mind has no effect by engaging in such a dialogues and so forth, then we should always ask the question: is it worthwhile to be able to do this and have discussions on Dharma?
아니 등저게 신주 집에 가라 삼제네 랑게 진짜 이남에 빠지 소야라 등주대 등에 가서 니마 추체 되는 되는도 단단데라 다 혼례서는 저기는 관심 니마 추체 되도 있어도 지레 세나라 워다 계시 추기 제선 다네 론도지 내세나리 렌제기 제선 다네 아니 가서 주도도 해보지 마제와 얘나 아니 니마 추체 되도 소리 지레스 지로와 등주지기 제일 제로 거다
So, well, from the beginning, the teachings given by the Buddha himself up until one's own spiritual teacher or one's own guru is to the teachings entirely on what is to be abandoned and what is to be achieved. What is to be achieved. In other words, importance of understanding achievement and abandonment. That is what the teachers Buddha has given us his teachings, and all the way to such teachings is given all the way to one's own root guru and so forth. If one is unable to engage in such practice and to be able to identify what is abandonment and what is achievement, then it's probably we are wasting our time.
아야, 드르지 신주 제베가라 소소게 따와 천진데라 간에 지 르르지 게네 되셔 치제되는 내 샤게임베 아니 지부 담바 대다기 네 리핏 내라 신주 제네 얘네 젠제데 마노와 레다 론도데 마노와 제쇼 소에게 제선라네 제기인다 미 세들 그러
So now the question to ask ourselves again is, shall we still remain in following one's own standpoint and what one think is right and what one think is appropriate for oneself? Or should we change our directions? Should we change our views and our, strong grasping at what we think is good? Or so it is, very, very essential, to really ask this question to ourselves and for what purpose we are really engaging in this practice of Dharma, or we are engaging in such important discussions on Dharma.
tana nga zon langa nangwa den dengen da 드르지 달레벌 제쇼 세나 샘벌 제 드르지 산이 여비 손한 제 여마로 대리 가서 좋은 저기 천만지 마도 소 진명의 잡지 거기도 추쇼는 집에 담바다 뜻이 가서 인지기 맞지 지음비 거라 가서 들을 소지 대비 소리 지래 인사로 왔다 가서 신주제리.
So if you really examine ourselves, just think about, we see people who is mentally unstable on the street, and they don't even know what's going to happen to us tomorrow and what is happening to him or her. And there's no such, feeling of urgency in them. Similarly, when the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas looked upon us as all sentient beings, have a similar way that the way we see people who are on the street with the unstable mental conditions.
전주지기 선발로 소화지 레토로제 나서 대지 당아서 랑게 내전나 가되니라 담바 투병 보라 아니 라레 집에 노만나제 니지 파신 정신도 거리 소리지 아니 뭐네 시제되제 나바스 아니 랑게 근데 랑도 따와지 손세네레 랑도 데바지 손세네레 선제 소자 무슨 천제다 랑도 데바지 소리 전주기 소자지 아니 가서 수제 근데 좀에서 뉴스에 뒤다냐 보기에는 사이 관련돼서나리 용수 좀 데리는 가서 아니지 최신의 세나리 최론의 제사 세나리 근데 저기 상제기 손지기 제사라네 데려해도 상게 되잖아 아니 이제다 대반이 됐을 줄로 해야지 근데 저와자는 미도까마 지스적이다.
With this in mind, one should have a strong determination that I must do something, that I can not only identifying what is achievement, what is abandonment, but rather I would engage in the practice so that I will be able to abandon what is to be abandoned, and I will be able to achieve what is to be achieved, and so forth. So with this kind of intention, one then visualize Buddha in the space in front of oneself, and who is surrounded by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and great sublime beings. In the same manner, one is being in their presence, and not only oneself, but one is surrounded by all other sentient beings without exceptions, not only the sentient beings in the formless realms, but also the form realms, but also the formless realms, sentient beings. In other words, we are to just think about, without exception, entire sentient beings are with us, and who are willing to willing to transform or work towards transformation of their mind, as we do as receiving these teachings. So therefore, with this kind of motivations, and I must follow the teachings of the Buddha Dharma to be able to change myself in a different person, have a different objective.
With
this, let's start meditate for a minute.
지당 가서 단단 가서 거스 보고 지레마도 이제 가서 열로를 선진 양타고지 통나야 라산지 저저사기 지 담바서를 지다야 같이는 지 산나도 안 될은 코너게 ran시 산나도는 인지로지 그 같이는 거래 소소제 소소를 내버지 매와 같이는 지 최지면서 맞았으는 선제 강해지지 통나는 안조는 지 관나래 라산 저이지라야 레와리지 저 근데 선제 되게 내다는 인지로지 잖아
So we should always cultivate, put an effort to cultivate these motivations of taking refuge in individuals or object of refuge, in other words, and cultivating compassion and extending one's compassion towards all other sentient beings. And this too is very essential for us as a practitioners whenever we engage in the practice or doing some kind of recitations and chantings and so forth. And this motivation is needed prior to one's actual practice.
아야, 또 들려지, 들려지. 나 들려지, 내 경험 치받지, 뭐네, 방세 받자, 있지. 내 상조나 렌치, 뭐, 쓰지. 아니, 저희 사치, 시치, 초고 쯤바 때문에, 제법이 저와, 당하를 기받지, 비시, 추지 저와, 저와 니도 님이 저라, 니 시제다셔. 당방은 저, 한마 제다, 저기, 봐서. 안테미, 저, 손샤로지.
With these motivations, the teachings that we are discussing is on the great teachings, on the stages of the path to enlightenment. To begin this actual teachings, let's go through the four major outlines. The greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as a noble source, showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings, and then how to listen to the teachings in which both teachings and then its authors are great, and how to rely on the teachers, which is the root of one's path, and the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions.
아니 저희 사제 시바텔라니 저희 사제니 추군 셈바 템비신 에마르 가서 런치 자와 신예 템비스다 된 로치다신 이제 많이 세데 로 마치 소소게 로소는 망가티바 조그인다스 차기다 된바 롱가 쉬쉬레 비서 진도
So here now the fourth outline, which is the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught actual instructions, has the two subdivisions: how to rely on the teachers, which is the root of one's spiritual path, and how the students train their mind after having relied on the teachers. So when you look at this, the fourth outline and that's two subdivisions of the fourth outlines, it really makes us to plan ourselves. How do we really embark on the spiritual path?
가서 대주메 계속에 가서 배게들 갈라지노스 당아서 대선 전선데 놀러라 지 민주여서 되텔 참가자들마도 아니 배게 용어 명화되다 아니 주바 간데도 면도 아니 언어에 가려 언어인데 세대 간데레도세네 아니 신주제 되는 면도세네 아니 가서들 가서 배워서 메시지 갈라지노스 영어에 내지랑 레도아 대에나 그러면 계산을 지러 당가서 이거네 제나 상제기 아주 남비 최대로 다지 조금 때문에 집앞이 쳐왔어야 돼. 추비 부대 다자기 템벌 투명이나 아니 최 될라 템비에 아니 냥도란지를 총아요 말에 써야 되라. 그래서 배 개점뭐 아니 저저 제가 개점도 당가서 되는 데는 초대인 거다 다 모쳐야 그 모쳐 게임벌에 되게 손하게요 말아도 그래서 왜 레도 갈래 저저저 네 로지도 또 받치네 좋아하면 저와친 거지 저 아니 바로 타마들로 로다제니 같이 모쳐 메시어리면도
So several days ago, Kimi Khyentse Rinpoche has given a teaching to the Tibetan community, where he has given a very good advice by saying that nowadays people are they're rushing towards receiving the teachings and empowerments from the teacher who has a name and who has a fame and a name, and which is not important. But rather, when you hear whoever the teacher or the spiritual master is giving some teachings, and particularly the empowerments and so forth, one should always examine and should at least know about the background about that particular teacher, regardless of who he is, what kind of name or title that he or she may have, and then think about how important it is for us to receive the teachings from the authentic teacher, and also to examine what kind of empowerment, what kind of initiations is given will be given by this teachers or the masters, and making sure that the reason why I'm saying that is whatever the teachings or the empowerment that is given, it should be given by someone who is a teacher who is qualified to be able to do this, and making sure the teaching or the empowerment that is given the teaching or the empowerment must be traceable to all the way back to the teachings of the Buddha himself.
Tā tēnā lō chitā chāyī rīmbā lā nī, tē tēnā nīmbō nīmbī shukū wā tāng, nīmbō chitā nīmbī tsū nī, nīmbō chitā nīmbī tsū lā nī, lāng chī nā chā lā nīmbā chitā tā nīmbō nī tsū ngō, tōmbō chī, nīmbā nī tsū ngō lā sōng, chūpa chūngyō tā tūmō yā lāng chī rīmbā nyāng sā nī tsū, chūpa chī tā, chūpa chīmbī lāng chī rīmbā nyāng sā nī tsū, tōmbō nī chī. Tā sōmbā lā sōng, tē chī lā chūpa kō, sēn chī kō nā tē bā, sēn chī tā chūpa, sēn chī nā shūpa lō tsū shē rē tō. Tā tōmbō sōngjī, sēnchē nā shabā lō tsī chī, sēnchē nā lōmbā lō kō bē chā tsē, tā shē rē rē wā lā lō bē sāngjē mā chūpa tēmbā, lōmbā lō bē rīmbā nī shē mā chī, tā tōmbō nī chī. Tā lōmbā lō bē rīmbā nī shē bā lī nī, tēpā chīmbā chū lā chū tsē tāng, chī bā tō tō chē tēpā lā lō tsē chī, tōmbō lā shē, shāng tsē lōmbā lō tē chā, shāng nē chā sē sā mō zō nē chā tā nī bī tsū chī. Tōmbō sōngjī, zō nē chā tā nī bī tsū lā nī, kāng lā lō bī shē, tē lōmbā nē tē lā chā tā lō bē rīmbā chī. Tā tōmbō nīndrī, tēnā chidā lō bē rīmbā lā nī, tē shūpa chū lā lō tsē tā chibā tā pāshē tāmā nī lā lō tsē chē tōmbō chī. Tā pāshē tāmā nī lā lō tsē lā chū, shēnē tā lā tōng chī pīyā shē bā, tēnī tēngiā zī kyun chū tē shē tē bā, shēnē lā tōng chī ngō yī na pīyā nī ngō, tēnī tēngiā zī, tēnī kā kāng kū bē chē tsē kō rē ngā bā sō sē lō tsē chē tā. Tōmbō ngā tēnzhī, sōsio lā tsī lā nī shēnē lā tsī, lā tōng lā tsī, tōmbō chī. Tā lā tōng lā tsī lā, sōng shē, lā tōng chī tsō tē bā, lā tōng rō tā, lā tōng gāng bē lā tōng rō bī tsē chī. Tā tōmbō lā nī, tāng tē tā ngē tē chī sō rō ngā sō wā, lū chū chū gōmbā chī bē tsī chī tā sō wā, tōmbā nī chī tā wā tē lā pō pā chī, tōmbā nī chī. Tōmbā nī chī tā wā tē lā pō pā lā nī, tē khuā nā nī lā chū bē rī mbā tāng, tē khuā nā nī chē lā pō pā ngō. Tā tōmbō lā sōng, gā shā ngā sō wā, tē kā bā tē tā rāng kā kī lō shē bā, shē bā tē lā tē nē tā wā chī lā chī bē rī mbā sē tē nī, ngā sō nī bā, tē kā bā tē tā rāng kā kī lō shē bā sē ngī tē kā tū. Nī kā sō pā pā ngā sō, u mē kī tā wā tē lā pē pē kī nō lā, nī pē kā jē jō rō, u mā bā sē ngī tē lā, u mā rā jī bā tā, u mā tāng jē wā sē nī shō bā rē sē. Nī tē jē, nī jā wā pēn chū jī shōng lā tē pē, u mā tāng jē wā tē tsī, rā jī bā tē tsī kā rē rē, chī sī pē kā jē jō lā, nī u mā rā jī bā tē tsī kā rē, tāng jē wā tē tsī kā rē, tā tā u mā bā kā rē jī lē ngā jē kā rē sē yī, tā kā jī tā rā lō yī tsō bā tē rē shā, tē mō bō shī wī jī nō, tē mā tē tā tē yī bā chē, nī ngā jī mā kā rē lō rō tē rē sā rē.
So we are on the chapter of discussions on different sort of the difference between the philosophical standpoints, the difference between philosophical standpoints of Madhyamaka, Svatantrika, and Madhyamaka Prasangika, and how the great Indian masters has differentiated between their philosophical standpoint of these two Madhyamakas, and later on how this two philosophical standpoints are differentiated by the great Tibetan masters, and then so forth. And so we are. So what is meant by Madhyamaka, and why this Madhyamaka has two divisions, and what are their differences, their philosophical views?
아이, 당연히 내가 최초에 엄마 봤을 때 찔러 가려 내가 그래서 엄마 라지 바게네 덴바 주바다 타녀도 여바니 로와 덴바 주바 요 말에 아니 타녀도 매바 말에 찔러 내야 돼요레스 지로 엄마 탄지 델레 싸워 반로데 엄마 탄지와게 엄마 라지 바게 당신이 주바다 랑은 주바 아니 대한다바 주바세네 캐네 엄마 탄지와게 랑은 주바 랑 주바세네 싸워니네 요 말에 세 디디나네 장난제 소지 나자 시에 되는 엄마 탄지와세 뒤져 가서 요다게 계속 존청을 하는 만잖아 치라라이 또는 고아치네 엄마 라지 바세 가르라 세그레라서나 덴바 마주비 텐데 아니 장난제 소지 나자 테바 켈링에 되는 엄마 라지 바세 그래 다 추어탄제 라신 좀 디자 메바 켈링비 토네 아니 장난제 소지 나자 아니 쟁에 되는 엄마 탄지와세 그래서나 대상주 고알해 도지 거
So the actual differentiations, the difference between Madhyamaka Svatantrika and Madhyamaka Prasangika. So here in the context of mathematical Svatantrika, who accepts inherent existence, but rejects ultimately existence of things and event. And on the basis of rejecting ultimate existence of things and event, and they embark on their path of the sequence of their path, such as path, the basis, path, and fruition will be built upon that philosophical standpoints. Whereas Madhyamaka Prasangika, they do accept conventional existence, and yet at the same time, they reject inherent existence across the board. There's no such inherent existence of entire spectrum of phenomena. So therefore, on the basis of of refutation of inherent existence, they embark on their spiritual path, such as basis, path, and fruitions.
아야. 내가 저 저신 하시 영에 계시지 말어. 랑이 딩이 잘라 가려서나. 잘라 때 뭐비네 쓸래 시당. 아니 오마바니라 마다와 대여레 세디로와.
So then, what we are, if we give a lucid example here, is think about the object in front of us, in front of us on the table, and although that's the same object, the way they interpret the object, the actual existence of the object, interpretation of the actual existence of the object or object that is on the table is a difference, and then there's a difference between the Madhyamaka Svatantrika and Madhyamaka Prasangikas when it comes to the actual mode of existence of the object that is in front of them.
아야. 맞아. 단데 데 파타디 가사 녀토르 슈지 녀토스는 때 제보 뭐지 선제인데 제당가 좀 오메 따왔던 버베기 저런 뭐지 하도 참으세는 깨달아. 내 하도 참으세 나리 참으기 타기. 아니 신내 때는 베서텔라 존센코노미라 하도 참으세라 그시.
So this requires a lot of analysis in this particular, the chapter itself. It is the Lam Rim Chenmo, which is the great Vipassana, teachings. It is called in other words, the great insight, teachings on the great insight. What is also called it's Lam Rim Chenmo, which requires a lot of analysis.
되지. 당연히 가서 내래. 때 변제다이 로마 로자와시 티가도래. 대가라 가서 타지도 너바 당모.
된다고 나오지. 다르지라. 다도 이게도 돈도 단위 강라서 개림 단위도 랑루를 매대신 도디.
야, 다들 되다. 타네 다야 랑로도 다들 고추스 데르베. 변제다이 로마 로자와 다게 내게도시. 대체 인서스. 얘디건 타지 점은.
쇼 안에 다게데.
그랬다게 대야스레베.
네 데레 좀
나는 말래나.
데데 케 밀렘버 현기 되고 거버선 제반이 탱교를 제반 나고 세죠 바르지. 데버들레세 데저래. 데저는 단데 다도 엄마 탱교에 되고 다기 된담바 타이바 강라선에 켈 렌니 타이도야 랑로 메데세트.
아니 다야로 멤버 다다 엄마 타지 대박가바네 세드 말어.
어디래라?
알레레베.
되고 어디?
상상 더라로.
나오는.
다다 엄마 타지 대박가바네 세드. 아팀로 당연히 로드마도 되는 텔레치 차도. 안타 제 데데스 칼레카니가도. 야 로긴다. 다다 엄마 타지 대박가바네. 담바 타니 바 강레 잠비 켈레네 타니 더야 랑루레 메데 게데 데더이 단자여나 데 주시 집에다 따장 되고라 대다나 라지 번저로 대나 탄저와라 랑루 강야 메데 쯩도레 게데 단자 야 게데 녜단 장가여 대나 가라 쯩데여 가라 단자 메베나 나네 쯩메 khonayi 게데 무슨 라소비 된진가시 미나데 주방 도바시나 네 셰나데 me shi nga la len ka me che dang ripa chu chi pa le jang che yu dang ni de da jang nang la shu me zhe pa me gang nang la ne shu me ba de la ni yin shu ka la yu che ji ja pa le jang so do
because lawyer test chapter in the engine alia.
ya
In the law show.
an tu che de che ba ji ro ga ni de xin long de ji gong che na ba cha ro wa
Long,
to de lo da ga
long,
ni ga ni de u du de lo
yeah,
de
no,
che to ji ma xin long ko che ye re wa jo ge sa la da
no, so,
ba cha ja ro da
no, so, no, so. The chair has in the target today.
an tu che
They bought the lane some state. Target with the can't give shit. The visit in lots I don't get the Yangel that the law in the chair.
ya ya ko sha
Law some.
ko to ni ji lo sha da ne ko to chuan na le ro
I think several paragraphs, and I haven't read last teaching session, so I need to read because in which he said, try to read everything, because his main purpose of this teaching is to give a complete oral transmission of Lam Rim Chenmo, so that even though that if we are unable to have a complete comprehension on the meanings of these teachings, we will have a very good positive, imprints or the virtuous imprint as a result of receiving these oral transmissions. So let's read this again. I thought I read it, but I want to make sure it's not very sure. So it's 229, page 229. We'll start from the third paragraphs. The argument called the similarity of appropriative reason and then probandum involves showing how none of the examples signed in our opinion state in order to prove their positions can be proven in relation to these positions. The argument from that parallelism of the similar reasons involves parallelism between indistinguishable reason, such that if you accept one, you accept other objections. Well, then you do, or do you do, or do you not believe such refutation of what the opponents accept, or opponent accepts? If you do, then that itself is constitutes your thesis, and there would be an autonomous reason proving the positions. If you do not, it is pointless for you to give argument that refute that other parties accepts. Reply by the followers of the Jayananda. When you analyze the ultimate, if you accept the predicate such as lacks intrinsic existence or is not produced, then you have to accept autonomous these reasons. However, since we do not accept such predicates, we have no faults. It's simply believing something means that you have a thesis. Then everyone would have this about this thesis about everything. That is how the followers of the Jayananda explain their positions. Evidently, they believe that even though they have nothing to prove from their own side, they can merely refute others' position. That even though they have believes that they have no thesis, and that they have no positions to their own, avoiding this such as the absence of the intrinsic existence when analyzing the ultimate. Apparently they consider Svatantrikas, those who do not believe that there is nothing at all can be asserted, and how, therefore, when analyzing ultimate, assert predicates lacks intrinsic natures and establish that their own positions. Those who do not assert such predicates, but engaging only in the refutation of what is just accept, they consider Prasangika. That's all.
ai
We can law inside law yet again.
ro ye ta internet course as the car pen the dai chen course que se lo ta de te
Da get min dong ta ma get san de nga dog sa.
ta
E
da
ma law inside something.
当然你是叫把来去，是叫把来，越到没到越面去，看了说的越明白，得了越呢人不能两个就把女嘛人，些我们把了说当家没把送给小了，其实嘞，我们把人呢，让给就结束把了小娃。日本样嘛人的首先看了吧，没比小了些当，他就话都比短当样怕了不你，你就话引起可能嘛人的让了当家没比小了些当，就把来讲说的。
Also, that it is law that in
嗯
the third misinterpretations, according to those who today consider themselves Prasangika Madhyamaka, there's nothing to be accepted, even conventionally, in one's own system, neither as regard the ultimate nor as regard to conventional. If you have such a thesis, then you have to accept the example and reason that prove it, and it in that case, you are Svatantrika. Therefore, Prasangika have no system of their own at all at all for Nagarjuna's refuting of objection states. If I had any thesis, then I would suffer from that fault. But as I have no thesis, I alone am without faults. If sensory perception and so forth could actually perceive something, then there would be something to prove for the refute. But as they do not, I cannot be a fault. Also, Nagarjuna 60 stanza written says that Mahatmas have no positions. They have no arguments. How can those who have no positions themselves have positions and others? And also, I those foreign stanzas says no matter how long you try, you can never rebut. And those who have no positions in regard to existence, non-existence, or both, all of these are source showing that the Madhyamaka has no positions as a thesis. And the clear words are said, if you are Madhyamaka and not right on the Madhyamaka autonomous argument, for we do not accept the position of others, and also the opponents of the consequent and the reductio of opponents and opponents, but not to ourselves, for we have no thesis. That's all.
写当我们就把来讲去，就把来叫圣经别圣经下，圣经下，但是圣经别圣经下呢，圣经下马车圣人经写当，原的车人经写，怕是你把得讲了，你把学业得了，就是到了学的呢，也把明白套啊。就往那的是嘛，人写上手了，没得让了书面别卷民就把送别写了的呢，那家得到堂前呢，我们把研究我写别那家长的就把嘞，接到去之前我得到工作讲的大概看嘛呢，这些得到面积有多些。一旦我写大的帮我写结束了，最多来讲，最多来讲，感谢这样面别呢，俺的这样民国过，但是我把写到写，我的呢去知道，这人数了搞把面把送给写了写嘛，我写到，我就他妈，我就没把事都，我得把东西写去。
Also, the Chandrakarta's commentary on the Middle Way states, does the refutation work to refute by contacting what it refutes, and or does it refute without making contacts? This problem is inevitable for those who have positions, but since I do not, the reductio in argument does not apply to me. This passage is stated because Madhyamaka have no positions. Those these positions, so those four do not apply to them. Therefore, all Madhyamaka exposition are put forward only in terms of perspective of the other party. For a Chandrika just commentary on the middle way states, while you accept real dependent entities, I do not accept them even conventionally. For effects, I say that exists even though they do not. So taking the perspective of the world, I speak of as self, and what is known, what is more the original refutation objection says, since there's nothing to be refuted, I refute nothing. Therefore, it's saying that I refute something something that you insult me. So there is no such things as even refuting something in our positions. That is what they say.
de do ngani de chen do xi de je da jin yi le me xie se jin me se yin da da na ye me me ge da de ge pe chi pu ku tu ze ya xu de yin ji ro chen do le ga je jin me be na ye ne jin ming go ko de xu go ba xie de xie go de ne chi je da se ne pe ji xi de ka tu che wa na da ra ne ge do.
So if you take as literally of this verse that we have read earlier, that's the Nagarjuna's refutation of objections, right? If you take it literally, then you may end up in meditating on nothingness and so forth, because it says since there is nothing to be refuted, I refute nothing. Therefore, in saying that I refute something, you insult me.
Pena nga cho sen che de ha ba cha ta me shi ta rang lu yin na pena ko sun de ba me se ne re ga ja ka bi ga ja yang ra shi tu ba ye ma re ka bo bo ra shi tu ba ye ma re ani ji ya ra shi tu ba ye ma re se ti go ko len ro.
So for us, what we should interpret, what we should want, what we should how do we interpret this particular verses is that what is to be refuted, and in other words, object of refutation is also non-inherent existence, and a refuter who refutes this object of negation or object of refutation is also non-inherent existence, and everything. And what is you're establishing, after refuting this this object of negation or object of refutation, the very establishment itself is also non-inherent existence. That is what is meant in this particular, the actual meaning of this particular verse.
Nga zo ka sa zu ko ron go ne she don ba ni zu le jan don ba ji je ma yin se de ka ro ka si je na ma je de zu ko ron go je che ne ani zu ye ni ka sa ta ran sa shi se na chen ji ge na ka je mi de she ji cha je ro.
So just as we find in the Heart Sutra, there's a fourfold emptiness. The form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form, emptiness not other than form, and form is not other than emptiness. Quite similar to this.
Ai de zu ko de len go ro ko pe so bo ro pa so ji mi she ro pa re shin se ro.
This is very profound meaning that we need to think about. Arjun Paramita's meaning, so it's very profound.
Ai ka ma chu pa so sha.
Let's take a 10 minutes break here.
Ai, 당연히 밑에는 로션이다. 아야. 먼저 한번 나와서 로벤다이 제선랑 베지 케바 카진네. 대다 오마발라 란루지 쇼당 대다 루시지 세마 멤버들이 루나 레바 순쇼네 랑게 루네 리바 넘버 시비 rangi tseni ji yeja tang semin naja kelin bi ngombo tauju ji sema ngoje ninga ka ne tanya de mashi benje ten trapi tsema tang yeja kelang ne oma ba rangi shugo la ju bi nga ko bi go ne tensi yang da sheba mebe ten juba shedo deta na yang rangji pa minjo wa ne ma shi bin ji ten trabi tsemi go ne jobi shiro she che to nipa deta ga pa la je sondo nge ni ma ten me ke to ma go yin sa chi cha ke to no se ka ko mi do
The fourth misinterpretations, some early Madhyamakas, Tibetan scholars who follow the Master Chandrakriti argues as follows. We completely reject this system that claims the Madhyamaka have no positions of their own and no valid cognitions to establish them. Our own system is as follows. We refute both the perceptual and inferential valid cognition based on real fact of those who put forward the presentations of the valid cognitions, and object is recognized in terms of intrinsic character that can withstand rational analysis. Accepting conventionally without analysis the valid cognition and cognized objects familiar to the world, we Madhyamakas demonstrate that things lack true existence with sound reasonings by making approved statements to the opponents. Even so, we are not Svatantrika, for we posit the lack of true existence by means of valid cognitions that are familiar to the world analyzed.
ai 탄저 여기 내가 배바 있대 병하러 봐 가서 병하러 봐는 세거를 지내는 미시 가지 병하러 봐 생각에 저런 뭐 지금 어미 따와 때라 마페 거는 다 어미 따와 때라 병에 뭐 붙여로 와 옛날 쇼진은 당 좀 라모 오마 버스 지세 ren다 어디서 베데 오마 버스 타냐 거 오마 버든 레도 옛날 다당 저기 지세 잠배 이게 저런 뭐 지나 소매 오마 탄저 어디 장신 마주비 이치 있는 아니 데니 연나에 조 통에 돼 저런 뭐지 팀모 많이 봐 관제신도 수제 성화 발생 되래도
So now, thus the earlier Tibetan scholars who consider themselves as a Madhyamaka, as these positions, there's no the earlier Tibetan scholars here refers to the prior to the emergence of Lama Tsongkhapa in this the land of snow, and although prior to Lama Tsongkhapa's emergence, there had been many scholars and outstanding scholars such as Jesu Rendawa and Lama Umapa. Even the name has Umapa with who actually follows the Madhyamaka's standpoint, or Madhyamaka's philosophical standpoints and so on. However, none of them have actually been able to establish the both two truths, conventional and the ultimate truths, within one basis or within one locus. Only the Lama Tsongkhapa is to be able to establish those two truths within one basis or one locus.
아야 다 오미 따와 닝 오마 탄지게 따와 닝에게 배 건진 전에 여만에다 로투 말에 배 세질리 질제 제마 제세밀라이나 세질리 정어버도 상제서 될 뭐버도 얘나 오미 따와 때라 배비토네 아니 이거네 다 장신지 마주비 지지기 때문에 신랑데 손지 나게 채통에다 아니 단위 지도 시통에다 배제 용된을 병인데 다 저런 뭐지 권한 인사로.
Although we cannot say that there's no one who has gained the realization of Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint. Of course, there are many who have gained the, who actually even achieved state of enlightenment and so on and so forth. For example, Milarepa and so forth. They have gained, without a doubt, they have this Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint. They have gained the pure Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint and so forth. However, nobody have actually come out and taught, vigorously about Madhyamaka Prasangika's philosophical standpoints, other than Lama Tsongkhapa at that time.
나이 대치가 제가 차로나도 다 배우관제 좀 엄마 바꿔서요 나 엄마랑 집이 있다마도 엄마 단지 있다기 때는 병이 좀 말했으나 다 세카 지선 되래.
So then, in brief, at that time, in earlier, you know, before emergence of the Lama Tsongkhapa, there had been Umapa or followers of the Madhyamaka, but they are unable to establish or propound the teachings on the Madhyamaka Prasangikas, but only Madhyamaka Svatantrika's teachings.
내가 가려고 그러잖아. 야 엄마 단지 게임을 계시면 엄마 타란이라 따기 차라요 말을 라비어도. 디감 연체 뒤뒤송 엄마 단지 타란이라 따기 차라요 말 생에 단달도.
So therefore, they used to say that there's no subtleties, difference, or the nuance differences between their view of emptiness between Madhyamaka Prasangika and Svatantrikas. Even now, there are some holds these positions by saying there's no subtleties or the nuance difference between the Madhyamaka Prasangika and Svatantrika.
대상지 마체 저런 뭐지 체달을 내는데 생에 배 개발된 줄로가 개발된 모종을 세다 체달을 내는데 진짜 맞으나 타니도 저투 말했을 때래.
There had been quite a number of scholars in the past have criticized Lama Tsongkhapa by saying that Lama Tsongkhapa's understanding of Madhyamaka Prasangika is actually a nihilism.
nimba teta gaba la je che lu tombo gaba ne ju ben je shi che lu na ta che tseme ma ju bi ta tseme ma ju bi jin sen de ne riba ma yin de ta ta go shu go ni ga tseme ju sen go so xie de bi lu la yang shu go le ju la ju ba nga go je ma xie 다스 메롱한 데고 마인베 진센 데이 셔르 골라 세메 에마르 진센 데 슈골라 세메 주바 고파 메케비 셔당 슈고지 진센 미시베 젤라 세메 주바 미시반 조나 젠제 텐데 켈람바 양 미시베 파르비 켈란지 고네 고바 소장 메테비 셔데 파르보 코원 대단 뇌도 시비 치 무슨도 녀장 제다 마왔다 켈렘바 망에비 셔당 인생 미시비 쇼로 처바 체메 마주비 진생양 메데 진생양 메데데 상망기 땡도 도여라 메여지 처바 주바나 또 봐셔 이제네 상망이라 데 땡도 또 봐셔 이때 도여라 메여지 처바 장이지 상망게 도여라 메여기 메여지 처번 zemba 땡 민베 유디 쇼레이 처번 주바 갈라인 대다마이나 대저이 처바데 녜비시 참모도 미롱에 제대이 된도 대고비 제된 거소 베나다이 된도 녜바샤이 주지추 마타바데 자본니가라 제선조와 거제 다이 차시스 주비 마타바 자도 메롱안 자오사 리파 대장 이 용세지라서 리파 대장 처바 주비 제발라 Tsema meba ndoba miriba sheba shao, teta tseme maju na go shugu chi ke langba tsang chi zhuba yin chi, mawa yang riba ma yin de, ke langba tsang jinsen to she na parabo mi ke ban ju de, di ke langba ne dun de zhu la. Tsema ne rangshin nika mibi shiro, yun de ke langba la cheba she ne, den dawe zhuban de minju che she na ne, 대단 제바 켈람비 진세지 제나네 조자당 손라 체마 유메지 제나네 체마게 반되바 냥소 루니바 가바네 손도 로셔 그치다데 하고네
Refuting misinterpretation of the Svatantrika or the Prasangika distinctions, refuting those positions, and refuting in the first misinterpretations. In the system of Jayananda's explanation of Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way, valid cognition does not establish the reason and the probations. Jayananda claims that valid cognition does not establish the reason, but this justification is deficient for the following reasons. The first, even in a system that holds both opponents, an opponent must have previously established the reason with valid cognitions. Something does not cease to be considered as a reason simply because the proponent is not certain that the reason is established for the opponents. Hence, Jayananda's rationale does not vitiate against the necessity of the opponent establishing the reason by means of the valid cognitions. If you claim that you do not know that whether a reason is established for an opponent because you do not know that the mind of opponent, then follows that you cannot even be certain that other party has accepted the particular points. Therefore, it would be impossible to refute opponents in terms of what they accept, etc. Why? Even if you have a perceptual certainty about the opponent's word, when they say this is what we accept, following your logic, you would not have certain knowledge that they actually accept that they have stated, because you do not know the mind of other beings. The justification that Jayananda gives for why valid cognition does not establish the perversion is also inadequate. The kitchen is the object basis upon which you understand the perversions in kitchen. When there's some smoke, there's a fire. The thing that's understood with respect to the basis is the bare perversions, and when there is smoke, there is a fire. It is certainly not that you do not apprehend the perversions where there is a kitchen, or where there is a kitchen smoke, and there's a kitchen fire, and hence, how could it be that you apprehend a provision limited a particular time and place, or else if the provision were limited in that way, since kitchen would not work as the basis of ascertaining such a limited provisions, you would not have to be adduce some other basis in relation to which ascertainment of this limited provision is needed. For example, impermanence, a predicated quality that is ascertained with respect to the sound, must apply to both sound and ports, sound and ports. A form of impermanence that is sounds alone cannot be posited as a predicated quality. This same line of the reasoning demonstrates that it is in accorded inaccurate to hold that inference establishing that perception is not valid cognition. He also claimed that only proponents and opponents acceptance of the perception established is in as much as valid cognition does not establish it. It is also incorrect. Why? If you treat the mere acceptance of the position of justification for it, then you cannot refute it. You cannot refute this opponents for the opponent's assertion of point would you establish it, and neither side has any valid cognition that can refute it.
네, 내가 가서 같이 인도바서는 저 배치 거좀 못쓰고 말해. 저당 가서 루데까봐 타랑 관계 루시에 봐세대니 단지와서 간대질에서 런지바 간대질에서 그래서나니 같이 인도바 뭐 지잖아. 데이터를 줘봐야 돼. 그걸 도시.
That's an argument and from the other opponent and one's own other system and one's own system. Difference between the mathematical Svatantrika and mathematical Prasangika's philosophical standpoints.
맞아, 엄마 답이걸라 엄마 전화 코로나 엄마 텐도 생긴다. 아니 엄마 단다 가서 최대天堂에서 용생 수도 줘봐요래. 수도 코로나 용생요래.
In the monastery, they have one particular session or one particular, teachings that is designed only to have discussions on this argument of the other system and one's own system. It is studied extensively at the monastery. It's opponent and on the other system and one's own system. No.
Rangin yume shebi rishi je tangja de minrupe tangja de ke malemba yina yuan de kona nila shebi go yinbi shir she tasu go ba tangja ke malemba doba yin dombo tanda rangin meba tang jebi duan de rishi je minru na rangin yuwa ba tangja ba de tangja bi duan de yang rishi mekeba jode jinsen sombi shero gete de konani la shupi gos ranshin yoba tangjabi dayang meke so nyana dene shindu merite ma riba nangji namba sheba de jinlu geba yino she ma yi sheta ma shebi shebe ranshin ji lu na gaba mini bi shedan jen to na ranlu je tangja mende che mi je se go te mi je se jen lu go bi tangja yang mende bi shero jen je tuta la sun jin bi tangja she na ne ranshin yoba gaba ni ranshin meba juba yin ba ma tsuendo Sande ne somba ta yinbe teta la ponsun me to teta me na ranshin me ba drupa yinji ranshin yoba kaba me no she do ne mawa lenchi ye ranshin me ba yonsu che na ranshin den me sawa namba che go be nyanso teta na ranshin yoba namba che na den me sawa ranshin me ba yonsu che go ba tsomba yino kete te konani la shebi go yinbi shena ranshin me ba soje tang chawa mirongwa nyana deyi jinsen to tongzha deyi jimari jinsen to tadong menshi jete te konani la shebi go su zhuna ne dēng dāmbā zhūgu bī shir kē mēlēn bā yīn, kē mēlēn nōwa nyāna, dēne rība mā yīn dē tā, dē khunā nī lā shir bī gāu jāng mīndē bā nē, umā bī rība nāmbā shir bī dū mē sī bā ndē gō lā, kap delen jonane shoba podang shobi riba dang shobi yedang kan dang lenji shobi shogo sojang ngeba de go pe de kos juba tangji ale de tangji juba gala go tawa zangshi ngeji kelangba kelangbi tatuban yinbe sema mejang tewa xie de xie mawa yang yi tsimba xie ba ma yinbe ma de lu dongbo ka ba xie de ka ba xiawa yin no yin yang de kwana ni de xie bi ga se ke men ba ta ne de ke len yu de xie nang ban jo na te ba ma yin de kwana ni de xie bi go ne de dang de mi rong ye他呢都学过吧，点点给我一些当，点可能你了学比告诉，没把点当都没比短音呐，点当都看来语吧，对比我们把虽然没比，他就一起就是没容比小了上头，或者一种是他他讲，
As a
路
question,
么他什么都当个你这些
that's
做过什么的，你什么，
okay. 차고를 다 돼.
都开始个搞的一些些。
No, question that what if you were in a distinguish between different types of the acceptance, wherein one type could and the other could not establish the reason prohibition, etc. Reply: if you justify such a distinctions by the mere fact that it's been asserted that your argument, resemble what you are trying to prove, and you have not advanced your positions. If, however, you make the distinctions on the basis of whether there is a valid cognition to make up an assertion, then you have strayed from your belief that there are no valid cognitions. Refuting the second misinterpretation, you hold that avoiding an autonomous thesis means that in analyzing reality, you do not assert that thesis that there is no intrinsic natures. But it is not accepting that thesis. This is because the thesis is not established by the reason knowledge analyzing whether there is intrinsic nature, or in not accepting that thesis. Do you adduce that the reason that is thesis an occasion in which reality is being analyzed, and which do you hold? In the first case, if reasoned knowledge does not establish the refuted, the referent of this thesis, the lack of intrinsic nature, then the reason knowledge could also not refute the referent of this referent of the thesis, intrinsic nature existence, for similar reasons. And it is utterly incorrect of you to think that the referent of this thesis, intrinsic nature exists, is not refuted when reality is being analyzed, for the following reason. First, you claim that previously that reason analyzers refer the other system. Second, non-analytical conventional refutes the other systems. Non-analytical, the conventional knowledge cannot refute others. Otherwise, if analyzers did not refute the thesis intrinsic existence, then why would you have to pacify we accept this thesis in our own system? For in this case, you would not even accept reductio argument that refutes the other system. When you use reductio argument to establish the tenets of the other party, then the refutation of this existence of the intrinsic nature should itself establish this absence of the intrinsic natures. I made this point above in regard to the previously cited passage from the refutation of the objection on these commentaries. There's no third alternative where this not case, where this not the case, something might claim just the opposite of your position, saying I'm establishing the absence of the intrinsic nature. I'm not refuting the existence of the intrinsic nature. when response could you give? If you think that affirming that essence of the intrinsic nature must, without a doubt, negate intrinsic natures, then it should be also be the case that the negation that existence of intrinsic nature must, without a doubt, similarly affirm that essence of intrinsic natures. If you think that this, such as the absence of the intrinsic nature, are improper because it is an occasion in which reality is being being analyzed, give you a justification of this now. You may suppose that one cannot accept such belief because something that exists when reality is being analyzed must ultimately exist. But this conclusion is incorrect. If you reject the very occasion during which the reality is being analyzed, then you will have to accept this. You'll have to accept this impossibility of a time period during which the Madhyamaka analyze things with reasons. But if you admit to such occasions, then you definitely must also accept the existence of the analyzers, the analyzing reasoning, the basis of the analyzers, the opponent with whom you are analyzing, etc. Hence, why it is necessary for everything that exists at the time of exists ultimately. Nor it is satisfactory to claim that it's insofar as more reductive involves only what is asserted by the opponents, or what can ultimately be derived from those assertions. You are constructing a reductio even though there are no valid cognition. Therefore, I refute your view just as I refuted the first system above. Moreover, it is not appropriate to claim that you have the assertion that while reality is being analyzed, but that you do not have assertion conventionally. This is because the occasion during which the reality is analyzed cannot be an ultimate thing. Hence, it must be a conventionally, and that contradicts your thesis. Also, if not existing while reality is being analyzed means not existing ultimately, then having no assertions while reality is being analyzed could not be a distinguishing characteristic of the Prasangika, for no Madhyamakas of any sort hold that they have assertions ultimately.
Chidang yana nga chungde ri tandri kesi shibu pena kia lenpa da kia langpa sengi de yang raga ma re. Kia lenpa sengi osu kia lang se de ripi ponsang chi na ane kui kia lang la songpa sengi de re.
So there are, the assertions of the other system, and then how that one response in which their assertion is refuted, and this is all this, arguments went back and forth.
Pena nga zong oma rang jiba ye denpa chuba kia rangshin chuba kia le na tanya de meba kia lang la songpa re. Rangshin ji chuba kia le song na tanya de meba kia lang la songpa re. Ngo si tia na oma ba yin se kare tanya de yoba kia le karo. Yena kia lang la song se di rangshin ji chuba se na yin la doba me na tanya de yung tu ku ma re se di.
So, for instance, Svatantrika, if something that doesn't exist intrinsically, if there's no inherent existence, and then they reject even the existence of the conventionalities, the conventional existence will be rejected by the Madhyamaka Svatantrika, because the Madhyamaka Svatantrika, for them, that things that exist inherently, although they do not ultimately existence, they do not accept ultimately existence, but they do accept inherent existence. If there's no inherent existence, there's no existence.
Lu sumba gaba ne oma bala tanya dong kele me do she mawa ne nga sheba da ripi gaja lepa ngoma zimpe rangshin gobi ripa nanji pa la gaba na tsulan dobi tse rangi lu lang Jitawa Jen Tsumban Juba Tonde Rangi Lu Jane Jen Jen Mari Jane Jenpon Ye Ma Shepe Konde Je Tenje Tangji Onshu Dang Yueme Ndawa Sonwa Yino Deishir Dene Oma Bala Kuwa Daba De Konde Si Shindu Tachi Ba Yinla De Da Nyang Hama 대단 한 마음도시 센터 오마발라 켈레 유메 셔바네 오마바 셔바 간당 데나 오마바 조바 켈랑 거베 담바 디자야 마주바당 타네도 타지 주마다비 텐제지 데 도반데 고바 ndo gobe kelamba shawa yola 대양 대니지 도쇼 당바 여바 당 타녀도 매반 되비 마왕님바 까네 야거베 가주지 도비 세마 여바 당 랑게 도바다 옌라 시지 마로바 된비 우마비 나 미비 셰당 대다 넘바 자발라 고와 남지 최당 된비 Lenka chungze chang meba lu dene che yonsu taba yino dena keba oma pi juan tang chewe lu rangin jo ma xe nang de me che kuwa men taba ten jin rewa juwe ripa kelamba nye je tengen je chawa tada choba la kong zobi lo zhe je nang je ne oma pi lu oma be lu namba jaba genda tangje ta jewa shayi nyon demba dela rewa meja o tsese le jang so do o kisi de lo de ja shu kala kas
So refuting the third misinterpretations, as previously explained, those who claim that the Madhyamakas have no thesis, even conventionally, have not properly identified the object the reason negates. Hence, they refute the proponent with the argument that refutes intrinsic nature, and then when the situation is reversed, they see those arguments as applying in exactly the same way to their own system as well. In setting forth their own system, they have no idea of how to avoid errors. Hence, all dependent arisings, whether of cyclic existence or the nirvana, end up having ontological status like that of non-Buddhist fabrication, Buddhist fabrications, such as divine creators. Therefore, that interpretation slanders the Madhyamakas and mirrors other contempts. I have already explained at length this repetition on the positions, and those who analyze whether Madhyamaka is that anything must agree that the Madhyamaka is posited as one who has the middle way. Hence, they will have to accept that Madhyamaka understands the meaning of dependent arisings, that ultimately not even particles exist. Well, conventionally, all this like illusions. So there's something to assert. Moreover, you must posit this by refuting the vile claims that are the reverse of the positions, namely the belief that things ultimately exist, and belief that they do not exist, even conventionally. Therefore, there is a valid cognition that knows what is proven and what is refuted, and there is a discourse in which Madhyamaka, based on their own knowledge, currently teach others. Because of this, and because of the opponents have a philosophically coherent response to the point that they set forth. This system is accordingly, even if you do not know how to set forth the perfect system of the mathematical scholars, you should at least not slander it by claiming that it does not exist. The very acceptance of the reasonings of the dependent arising cuts through all of this, all of the entanglements of the wrong views. The intelligent who heeds this will avoid all contradictions in setting forth the mathematical system and will not trust those who spread such lies. Chandrakirti's clear word states. That's all.
엄마 탄저기 상신이 좀 바꿔요인데 탄이든 저 두고 말이에요. 세네. 근데 엄마 탄지로를 거사 다 가봐. 제 내가 치셔대로. 나중에 저런 뭐지 체탄에 대해서 대래. 상신이 좀 바꿔요. 비거라 제 하고 말이에요. 탄이 정도 저 두고 말이에요. 세이. 전화대래도 안 될라. 가디 거 본체도.
So this is how they always argue. They always, raise their argument with regard to Madhyamaka Prasangika by saying that Madhyamaka Prasangika, if you refute the intrinsic existence or the inherent existence, and there's nothing exists, and there's no law of cause and effects, and there's nothing that can be built, there's no basis for path and fruitions and so forth. So if it is their own system and their system, if something that exists, it should exist intrinsically or inherently. If something doesn't exist, if something that doesn't exist inherently, then they should not exist. So that's their argument.
근데 나중에 세나리 제단에 나중에 지금 말에 내가 미개사 가르제 엄마 라지바 이슈다 나중에 미개 도데바티스 깔라 아니 그 많이 바티 까요데 깔라 임바조고데 임바다 까요데 많이 간조 못세데 덴지게 나자 아파트인데 삼미게 주타방 엄마 중에 깔라 강에 제거리 제단이 된대시 그래서 엄마 타지로라다 이때는 좀在怎么着地上要买的设备高了 다나 가서 로드기 샤진하게 연수 잡아 태그 가르치는 태그를 세다다 뭐네 봐 가서 카톡 시에는 대마르지로
So this, argument among the different philosophical tenets, among the different tenets, and have all these arguments, beginning from the, Svatantrikas, the lower class of the philosophy, such as Svatantrika and so forth, have even among themselves have a different, acceptance and arguments. And certainly when it comes to the highest, standpoints of Madhyamaka Prasangika, there are many other, opponents who would actually try to, invalidate the assertion of the Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint.
가서 공시도 대체지매로 배나 엄마 탄저를 세다 너무 지기 간도지 코노이 인샤샤도 지로 우주전로도 소리지 전화다 논도로 당가서 인에 단지로는 이 소시시된 소소기 자초된 시 잘라 간지잖아 아니 잘라대 아니 텐데 간지잖아 텐데 조샤 아니 타마들로 코노 잘라대 미가리 따위에는 디미데 코노만 간지 주기도 세대의 신주제네 아니 시대에 된다 동반이 소소세도 고알행 거로 로 zu tombo se de da wo de jiro ta tomba ni su so se la yi be ka la no za ji ma za ma la bi ke se ro ka je den zhe che de ma do ya gong xi de ji dang ji san je yi ga le se na ko ro gi jian zhang zhang yin ba ji ya de ji je na ra ji to ba ni ma ri ko me jian da ji ge so sho do lo ro bi so ji ma de cha ma ro ne ma de cha ma ri le che ba.
So when we talk about, and when we talk about the valid or talk about the authenticity of the Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint and how things really are, it's not something that is somebody's imposed you to believe in that way, but rather it's a thorough analysis, which is that, in other words, the ontological status of how things really are. This is how the Madhyamaka Prasangikas carry out their analysis of how things really are. Because, for instance, if one has some kind of object that is in front of oneself, and how do you, not only that you are just looking at that object and seeing that it's the existence of this object, but in what manner, what is the mode of existence of this particular object? How do we really, you know, how do we really understand that object that is in front of oneself is dependently designated and dependently originated? And what kind of name that is imputed upon this particular object? And how this name is imputed? How do you really understand by following the imputation of the name on this particular object and so forth? It is same idea of that we talked about earlier in this Heart Sutra, where it's form is empty and emptiness is form. So when you think about form is empty, which is quite understandable. So you look at this, form is empty of intrinsic existence. And then again, if you reverse that again by saying emptiness is form, then it confuses you. How do we say the emptiness is form? What is meant by emptiness as form? So therefore, there's a big chances of getting misunderstanding of those statements if one is not gone through a critical analysis of the word that we use in Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint.
Ini chadang da nyumo yi nyenpo ten di ka la, ini karang lo ni ha, di rai nga singi ki tatang kare du, di jen jen nga kare che kudu singi de, ini rangji ki ten de, tongi che chen sen nare, tanji zu de pe cha sa da rangi le ja ne, ini de ki chadang kare de kudu se de, nyane jangi na, sen di ki de chi ten de tengi na, samba ja che tong nyanga di se la pogurwa.
So similarly now, this is how it really refers us to really to examine ourselves. And instead of analyzing the external world, such as object that is apart from oneself, and how the mode of existence of this particular object, but rather it emphasizes on more onto, look inwardly towards oneself. Particular when one is, is under the influences of attachment and anger and so forth. At that moment, if one is really a follower of Madhyamaka Prasangika, and one is having a wonderful opportunity to really to see what really triggers this anger within me, what really triggers this hatred and pride that triggers me, in what manner this anger is existed, and how I interpret this anger, and how I accept this anger, what is mode of existence of the anger and attachment and so forth. And this is how we should always analyze as a practitioner who is the followers of the Madhyamaka Prasangika.
Ini ti tendu tsosa rishan kanda che kudu, pesa kanda lo kudu, sede ini ti japten rarwa.
So then on this, then one should combine one's practice of accumulations and the accumulations and purifications, and what kind of particular text that is needed for one to recite or to read more and contemplate.
야, 다 텐du ye mishibi mibi ye nang kasa ta mawa te mache ba da ngaso tendu te chi de sheja koro mesi ro. Ro mesi. Ta ngaso masa nango nang de mdaw chi malo ye na, ini la de kore je de dharwa.
Until and unless we are able to clear this understanding or the misunderstanding of misconceptions of how things really are, then lasting happiness or the genuine happiness is not impossible.
Ta ngaso te ja ne, ini shangchu sengi senbi to ne, donyu to bi shela senro ne jo rangji le che ne, ini nyewa, ini sonju jo ko hang. To ne ba shi, che ge yin che ne ba, ini dine ju be nama no je shin jo lao do so sen, ini mwa da mwa ja chenpo chi nang shak.
Let's do our dedications by means of our, receiving these teachings and having intense discussions on this topic. May myself and all other sentient beings be able to generate bodhicitta along with the wisdom realizing emptiness, and may myself and all other sentient beings as a result of this, may myself and all the other sentient beings to be able to achieve the state of unity within these lifetimes. May all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 direction please bless me to be able to do this.
Oh ja, 吐气。